So my name is Claudia Navarro. I was born and raised here in Miami, Florida. Very proud to be from the 305. My parents are Mexican and Nicaraguan, so I definitely believe that I have sort of like the best of the culinary foods in me, and I definitely enjoy experiencing other cultures and other traditions, and I really, really, really love to travel. Um, I'm currently the program director at WeCount, and I'm very proud to be the program director at WeCount. We are a worker center based in South Dade that works with low income immigrant workers. And I came to this job, I think, for many different life paths that were chosen for me, but I ended up getting my first bachelor's in women and gender studies from FIU. I'm currently pursuing my second bachelor's in economics. And for me, my entire guided vision is when I tell people why and what I'm doing, and I always get the question, well, what would the both things have to do with each other? I always respond with, the reason you don't know that there's a correlation is exactly why I'm doing this. Because a lot of people believe feminist issues are not intersectional. And so my work is in emphasizing intersectionality in the ways that it can show up, right? And so I've been working not just at WeCount, but over the last 3 years of my professional career with marginalized communities to organize them and get them together so that they can make drastic changes in their community that challenges power structures. And so that's, I think, a little bit about me.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I'm wondering if you can tell me a little bit more about your job. What is it that you do at WeCount? And perhaps you can tell us a bit about how that has changed since the pandemic has started.
So WeCount's mission is just jobs and papers for everyone, trabajos justos y papeles para todos. And in such a difficult moment, knowing that there's so much need and also trying to fill that need, it's been very centering to have the question posed to ourselves, to us individually, right? Does this build immigrant worker power? And if yes, we do that. If no, we don't do that. And it's been incredibly centering to make sure that while there are so many people that approach us and so much good work that also needs to get done, that it doesn't allow us to engage in mission drift. We're very clear about our end goal. So that's been really helpful in this moment.
Tell me a little bit about how you're doing that connecting work, particularly for, communities who are so focused on survival. How do you make, the census, something that is a key concern for this type of community?
It definitely has been difficult, and I think it wouldn't have been able to happen without direct conversations. We began sort of like census season with multiple grants to do door-to-door canvassing, and we quickly had to scrap that. And so we pivoted to digital outreach, and we pivoted to radio outreach. WeCount has a local community radio station called Radio Poder, La Chispa del Pueblo. And so we focused our outreach into having Spanish and multiple indigenous language radio spots in Mam, Ichil, Mixteco, Zapoteco, like multiple different Mayan indigenous language radio ads. But we know that, digital media and social media and radio, even that sometimes didn't get to the most marginalized populations. And so when we realized that we weren't having these conversations that we needed to be having, we began having them with the folks who came into our office to receive mutual aid funds. Those we blasted to our general text database, right? Our contacts and our members. And eventually that spread out into the community. And many people who had never even heard of WeCount, that may or may not have heard of the radio, that put us in direct contact to be having these direct conversations with them. And, most of them didn't necessarily understand the importance of it before we began the conversations, but they also had a lot more questions about whether or not they were able to and whether or not that would put them at any type of risk. And so there were so many questions and hesitations as a result of many different misinformation campaigns and many different tactics to make sure that these folks weren't counted. And so, I think we were successful. We had over conversations with over 600 families that came in to receive mutual aid funds.
Thank you. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about, you know, particularly given the context of 45 trying to, not include immigrant populations in our census. What do you see as being some of the major consequences for, the Miami-Dade County area if, immigrants are not counted in the census?
So I think we continue with the low resources that these communities need. I think, there was a reason why the census was initially extended to the end of this month. And I believe from all the spreadsheets and everything that I was receiving as updates, most of the areas were on par or maybe just a little bit more in response rates than there were in 2010, right? And we know that, and I can't quote you the exact number, but I think it was like $1,500 per person per year over the course of a decade. And so we know that that's millions of dollars that these communities and our county at large is missing out on because they're not being counted, right? And so that's mass development and lack of resources that these communities have to be able to move forward. And so I think, the legal battles with the census, it was difficult for us to even keep up, for folks to know whether or not they still could. And I think that undeniably had a really big impact on these response rates, right? Compounded with the virus. There were a lot of groups, including WeCount, that were really excited to start this work in January, and unfortunately, I don't think that we were successful enough because of all that the administration was doing, and all the fear tactics to necessarily go over our 2010 rates.
Thank you for that. You mentioned that, a lot of your contact has been people coming in to the center, receiving mutual aid. Can you tell me a little bit about how the community and the group of people that you have served has changed because of the pandemic?
I think, everything is much more precarious. And I think that, what are people's most dire needs, right? Food and shelter, right? Being able to provide for their families. And we see, that there was a statewide rent moratorium, but I was seeing people come in every single day with threats from their landlords and not being able to have access to the proper information or the proper legal representation to be able to say, hey, actually, I have rights under this moment. Even if I can't pay my rent now, that doesn't mean that I should be being threatened with eviction. And I think, obviously there's a financial aspect of not being able to pay a rent or trying and choosing to not pay some things over others because of this sort of tension. But obviously there's the mental health aspect, right? Not only are you worried about contracting a very deadly virus that affects disproportionately the community that we're working with, right? And that at the workplace, there aren't being sufficient health measures put in place, sufficient personal protective equipment to keep folks safe. A lot of hush hush, right? You can't tell the other person that you got COVID, no one else says, and then everyone gets infected, right? We were seeing a lot of that. And so I think the compounding stress of a public health crisis and not being able to pay your bills, I think we have still not begun to see how terrible it really has been for the local community. And I also believe there are a lot of people who've been taking advantage of this moment, right? A lot of workplaces, a lot of landlords, proprietors, all of these things that I think make people believe that they have less and that they're worth less. But I think that that's one part, and then the other part is, part of our application process. We asked for phone numbers, and there were, out of the over 600 people who applied, I would say 50 to 100, their phones were out of service, right? By the time we were able to service them. And so they chose, and we know that they chose to let their phones go off, to pay for food, to pay for rent, to pay for all these things. And then we no longer had access to those folks to be able to give them the information that they wanted and they needed, right? And I remember having so many conversations with folks, because we weren't giving away a lot of money, to each individual family. We were giving away $250. And I would engage in conversation and say, I know this isn't the end all be all. I know this doesn't solve all your financial issues. I hope this helps. And what other issues and concerns that you have? How else can I plug you into resources? And large and by far, everyone was like, I can't pay my rent. I can't pay my rent. I can't pay my rent. My landlord's telling me this. And so as a non-lawyer, I had to advise them and say, look, you have these certain rights. These are certain steps that you can take. And so we were helpful, but like to the people who we weren't able to even access because we were too late, you know.
Yeah, thank you for that. I feel like you've kind of touched on this, implicitly in a few ways. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about how you see the pandemic impacting your community in specific ways because of its history, because of, who is predominantly there.
I mean, I think it we know how the pandemic has affected, in terms of, a public health crisis. A lot of these folks don't have access to medical insurance. They don't have access to adequate health care. They can't pay for even reduced health care. And so we know that we're going to be seeing some of those compounding effects of folks that contracted the virus, that have lingering symptoms. We hear all the time that we don't quite know how this disease affects people in the long term, right? And so we know that those are those compounding effects. And, every day there's people who continue to not have jobs. There's people who continue to experience reduced hours, working, 5 or 10, maybe 20 hours a week at, whatever their wages are, and it's not enough. And so I think um, that there have been some mechanisms put in place, right? The CDC housing moratorium that was meant to prevent massive evictions. I think we're still going to be seeing them. I think we're still going to be seeing massive amounts of people on the street because they're also not able to access the information that they need to protect themselves, right? And so I think, we're on the cusp of a very dangerous moment, and I hope that we can pull back from it. But I think we're definitely going to have a public health crisis in the community. We're definitely going to have a, a houseless folks crisis, right? And we'll see to the level that these economies rebound, but without specific targeting to these communities to be able to make sure that they do rebound. That's why I believe, we have to organize. We have to educate ourselves and demand more from our electeds, from our community, from everyone else.
I'm wondering if you can tell me something that's happening in your community that you think other people should know about, maybe something that you feel like isn't being covered in the media.
Hmm. I'm not necessarily sure that there that there are things that haven't necessarily been covered. I think that they haven't been emphasized enough, right? So, we've seen articles of domestic workers, of day laborers, of agriculture workers, about quote unquote essential workers. And everyone sort of put hashtag essential workers. We believe in essential work. There was, caravans and actions being done, but everything's the same, right? Nothing's changed. And people have forgotten largely because you have so many other families who are part of sort of the formal economy that are still struggling and are waiting for a Heroes Act, for a CARES Act Part 2, whatever they call it. And so folks are struggling still without continued unemployment benefits. And so the marginalized communities that usually are ignored have been forgotten, right? There was, a month where that's all we heard. And so we know, and again, and I'll emphasize it, right? The majority of the people working and living in Miami-Dade County that, pay millions of dollars in local taxes are undocumented and are immigrant workers. And so if we're not sort of cushioning the folks that are most at the margins that help our economy run, then largely we won't be able to move forward. There won't be a recovery, or recovery will be significantly slower.
So, what do you think that your community needs right now? If someone is listening from your internal community, what is something that you think that they should know or something that they can do? And I would ask the same for someone as an outsider. What is it that they can do to really think about either helping your community or, perhaps taking what they're learning here and thinking about more close to their own proximity?
I mean, I would say always strengthen worker protections. Allow workers to unionize, allow workers to collectively bargain, allow workers to tell employers what they need to be able to thrive and live and work in healthy workplaces. And so we haven't seen that, right? Not for this community, not for very many other communities, right? We see large multi-million dollar billion dollar corporations who have been exploiting workers, right? And that's visible, and that we see every day. There are reports of, your Amazons and your Googles and all these people who have been exploiting workers. And that happens when you strip worker protections and you make it significantly more difficult for them to demand the things that we need, right? And I think, Florida is an at-will state. That even in and of itself strikes the power balance so that workers have less power to be able to demand the things that they need, and not even just want, just need. Bottom line, right? And we know that this has been a particularly difficult moment for small businesses, for businesses overall. But I think this, more than anything, has emphasized that companies put profits over people, and we need to be demanding that's not the case.
Absolutely. Kind of following up off of that, what would you like to see come out of this moment? How do you imagine building the world back differently?
Yeah, and I think, there have been so many people to say, like, I just want things to go back to the way that they were. I just want to go back to normal. I don't want to go back to normal. Normal was terrible, right? Terrible for so many different people. And I think, unfortunately, this has just exacerbated and opened up the wounds and the systemic inequalities and structures to make it that people can't thrive here. And so I believe that we need to be, like you said, building back better, but in a way that doesn't go back to what the status quo is, that doesn't continue to make billionaires richer and the bottom middle 50% or whatever the correct terminology is, right? The vast income, wealth, and inequality that exists in this country. And I think right now, Florida has Amendment 2 on the ballot, which is to up the minimum wage to $15 an hour. And so it's initiatives like that brought up by voters, by citizens, by constituents of Florida, to demand more, right? And so, that's not $15 all at once, it's $1. It's pushing to $10 and then $1 until we reach $15 an hour in 2026, right? So it's gradual. But I think it's making sure that folks have fair wages. Whatever cost of living in the city that you're living in, that's what you should be getting. We know that bottom line of indicators is, can you afford a 1-bedroom apartment as a single person, and X and Y and Z as a family or a familial unit, right? And it's making sure that folks are being paid adequately. And there was something that sort of that I read the other day that sort of emphasizes, right? We have people who say, I make X dollars an hour. And it's no, you make and produce and create services worth hundreds of dollars an hour, but you sell your labor for X dollars an hour. And it is that shift, that I think, that narrative that we need to start seeing. And then in addition to that, I think the majority of the rights that we've been able to gain in this country have been through our workplaces, right? Our workplaces are our lives. We spend significantly more time with our coworkers than we do with our own family and friends. And so we need to be demanding more from our workplaces and shift that narrative that we're not lucky to have a job. They're lucky for us to work for them, producing and creating profits for you. And I think unless there is that shift, that the power shifts back into the workers' hands, then we're going to continue on in the same place that we were before.
What have you lost and what have you found during the pandemic?
I think lost a sense of peace, right? I think like many people, um, we're all bombarded with news, changing news on a, the 24-hour news cycle is now the, 60-minute news cycle, because we get different news every hour. And so I think I've definitely lost a certain peace of mind. I absolutely am speaking from a place of privilege in that sense, right? Because I thankfully, and in the situation that I found myself personally, haven't lost all that much. Um, and what have I gained? Um, I feel like, you know, I transitioned into this new position right as the pandemic was sort of unraveling in South Florida, right? I started March 31st, 2020. And so I think I've definitely gained a place that gives me hope, and I'm gives me control in the way that I can help shape the vision and the way that we move forward as an organization, and what we demand from allies and partners, and the actual community. And so I think I've gained a job that I love, that I think is so important, and that I'm proud to be doing the work that I'm doing there every single day.
Thank you for that. Along the same lines, what has been healing or supportive for you? What gives you the energy to keep showing up day after day?
I think taking rest where it comes. I think, I say this all the time, which is, I could not have survived this year if my social calendar or if my events calendar continued on the same way it was before. In the social justice movement, everyone has an event. There's something multiple times a week. There's something to elevate or to talk through. And I think, you know, I would not have been able to survive, right? And I think it has been isolating, but I have a strong enough support system that's been able to get me through, where I have significant enough like human contact on a daily basis, that I don't feel isolated. But it's certainly been difficult, right? I think, recognizing when things are getting difficult, taking a step back, that would not have been possible without my family and my friends supporting me. And but I also think I don't have an option. I don't have a choice. There's nowhere to go. And so I think, because there's very little option and very little choice but to keep moving, it's making sure that by the end goal, by the end of the year, right, where the finish line is making sure that I get there not in tatters, and understanding that it's a long game.
Absolutely. That is a hard lesson, I think, to learn in general, that the life is a marathon. Is there anything else that you'd like to share that I didn't ask about?
Hmm. Anything else? I think this moment is opening up a lot of people's eyes, um, to what's been happening, right? I think on the same vein that I was saying earlier, where we're just, our heads down. I just got to go to work. I just got to go to school. I just got to do this with my friends. And this sort of individualized, sort of American ideology, right? It's about me. It's about my close friends. It's about my close family. And I think that this moment has certainly challenged that, to think about people that aren't in your circle and think about the collective good and not the individual good. And so seeing those instances, seeing people rise up throughout the country has been so motivating and so inspiring. And I think we can't let down. We can't relent. We have to be and get more organized in our messaging and the things that we actually want to accomplish. Um, and I'll also emphasize the that even if there's a vaccine that comes out, it'd be months before we're back to normal, and whatever normal was, whatever the new normal is, where we can go out and enjoy friends and families without the fear of contracting COVID. And so I think that the months coming up ahead are going to be really critical to making sure that things don't get significantly worse, for our workers, for our families, for immigrants, for Black women, for all the marginalized people that exist, and have been barely getting by, and we need to make sure that we sort of stay on course.
Thank you so much for that, Claudia.